Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is anguish, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Artem. Artem, thank you so much for sharing yet another great idea. Now, let's take a moment and review the definition of this verb. Anguish really only has one meaning, and that is to be extremely distressed about something. Related to this, you might also think about something causing extreme distress. For now, you should know that anguish is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms anguishing. The past tense and the participle form of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, anguish, ends in an unvoiced sh or sh sound. This means the ed ending is going to make a t sound, and we're not going to add an extra syllable when we pronounce that ed ending. The past tense and the participle form of the verb should sound like this: anguished, anguished. Now, there aren't any phrasal verbs that we need to study, so we're going to move on to some verb tense practice. But before we start looking at many more examples, I want to do a little active and passive voice review. Most of the time when I make videos, my sentences all focus on active voice. And active voice in English means that the person or the thing that is responsible for the action is beginning the sentence. It's most commonly in the pattern of subject verb. So the subject is that person or thing responsible for the action. You can see that in two very simple examples I have. Tim cleaned the house yesterday and Leslie wrote emails. Okay? We can see who is responsible for those particular actions. When we talk about the passive voice, though, we're going to begin the sentence with the person or the thing that is acted on or that receives the action. The person who's responsible for the action or the person doing the action might not even be mentioned in the sentence, or it may come at the end of the sentence after the preposition by. So I took those example active voice sentences and I made them passive voice. Tim cleaned the house yesterday would change into the house was cleaned by Tim. And Leslie wrote emails would turn into emails were written, or emails were written by Leslie. You might notice our pattern here in the past tense is that we're using a past form of be, so was or were, and then we're using our participle form of the verb. Now, some newer viewers to the video might be wondering, why on earth do we do this? Why are we making English even more complex? But there are a number of reasons someone might choose to either write or speak in the passive voice. Sometimes people do it because the person that's doing the action or that's responsible for the action just is not known, right? Or another reason might be that the person doing the action or the one that's responsible for it just isn't very important, which leads to that third reason. Sometimes our writers or our speakers really want the readers or the listeners to pay attention to that object, the person or thing receiving the action. So by starting the sentence with that object, it might allow someone to notice it a bit more. Another reason some people use the passive voice is to avoid blaming people. So when we have kind of a bad event or a bad result of something, instead of saying, this person did the bad thing, right? You can say, a bad thing happened, right? And kind of avoid assessing or assigning blame. So now let's do some example sentences with our verb anguish. Every time I make a video, I spend a little time looking for recent examples of these verbs in the news or in literature, because I really do want to find some real, authentic examples for you to better understand. As I looked for examples, I encountered a number of instances of the passive voice with this verb tense, which is why I thought it would be good for us to review this. Today, we're going to focus on making sentences in the simple past tense. We'll look at a sentence in the passive voice and then in the active. Let's start with the affirmative. In the simple past tense, but in the passive voice, again, our sentence is going to begin with our object, that person or thing that has been acted on. Then we'll use either was or were, and then the participle form of the verb. You can see this. She was anguished when she heard the allegations against her longtime coworker. Right? So this might be someone another person thought maybe was their friend, maybe it was someone they respected or looked up to, and now they've heard very serious charges or allegations that maybe someone has behaved in an inappropriate way or in an illegal way, right? And so it causes her this feeling of distress. Now that same sentence in the active voice is going to follow the pattern of subject and then our ed form of the verb. You can see that here. The allegations against her longtime coworker anguished her, right? So it again causes that distress. Now let's look at negative sentences. In the passive voice, again, we start with our object. We're going to use either was or were, then not, and then that participle form the verb. Here's another example. These politicians weren't anguished by inflated deficits during Trump's first term. And now we'll look at the active voice. We're going to use did not here. Inflated deficits didn't anguish these politicians during Trump's first term. Sentences rather similar to this were very popular during the fall 2024 campaign for U.S. president, as various people made claims and sort of argued on behalf of their candidates. Finally, let's look at making yes or no questions. First in the passive voice. To do that, we start with was or were, our object follows, and then we'll use that participle form of the verb. Was he anguished during his hospital stay? And then finally, in the active voice, right? Did his illness anguish him, right? Cause him distress? Sometimes someone might be in the hospital for something rather minor, so they don't feel worried. They don't feel very concerned or upset. These two questions were trying to better understand kind of someone's mental state during that particular event. Now let's move on and we'll talk a little bit about just one related word today, and that's the noun form of anguish. Our noun, you'll notice, has the exact same spelling as our verb. It also has the exact same pronunciation. When we talk about this word as a noun, we're talking about either severe mental or physical pain or some type of suffering. Let's look at an example of this noun in a sentence. The Holocaust historian spoke about the anguish of liberation because they had to confront what had happened to them and what they lost. So this particular person was suggesting that for many people out who had not lived those particular events during World War II, right? You would think, oh, you're being freed, you're being liberated. It must be incredibly happy. But for some, it was, on one hand, of course, a relief, but also still very difficult to kind of process what they had experienced. And that phrase, what they lost, can refer to a number of different things: family members, friends, possessions, their professions, their homes, right? The list goes on and on. Well, I'm sorry to end today's video on rather a somber note, but I guess that is appropriate for our verb anguish. Thanks again to Artem for suggesting today's verb, and I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.